Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Karen Hardy, and welcome to Flip This Risk podcast, where we interview high achievers about their relationship with risk taking and how it influences their leadership abilities. You can check us out at flipthisriskpodcast.com for more information. And I'm very excited today to have as my guest Mahesh Joshi. He is the inventor and founder of Biggie Bills and an interactive strategy thinking system for teaching strategy. Thank you for being here, Mahesh.
Thank you, Karen, for inviting me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Oh, indeed, indeed. So strategy is one of those, it's a big word. I hear it a lot. A lot of people use it, small companies and big ones too. And we see some success stories when it comes to strategy, and we've seen some unsuccessful stories when it comes to strategy. What exactly is strategy before we get into the Biggie Bills game?
All right. Well, you touched upon the pet peeve of my existence because too many people use the word strategy very loosely. So, in short, I will tell you, strategy is a plan of action. A plan of action that balances between your set of resources at hand with opportunities or threats in the external environment. So that's a very simple way to explain. When you're creating a strategy, you're balancing between what options of actions do you have and which plan of action will you follow and what's the rationale.
About that. Why is it though that let's talk about the big companies that we see and we relate to as consumers, like the
Right,
Borders, which don't exist anymore, and the
right.
Tories are us, which doesn't exist anymore, but the Legos, which does. Strategy. So even with these large companies, they seem to not totally get it right. Why is that?
Well, the let's go back to that. Creating strategy is balancing between internal environment where you have your resources and your strengths and also knowledge of your weaknesses
Mm-hmm.
with external environment that either offers opportunity that you can exploit or threat that you have to defend against. The reality is when a firm becomes successful, they feel I have achieved, I have reached the milestone, but the environment never remains the same. The dynamic nature of changing environment is where established firms sometimes miss a step or actually ignore the new reality. So, and that's why I love your topic of flip this risk, because the minute you start ignoring changes in your external environment, the risk level or potential of existence of your company starts to be coming under question, or the risk starts to rise.
Oh, absolutely. I just took a trip to Hawaii and actually was went up to one of the crater elevations on one of the most active volcanoes there. Of course, it's been quiet for years, and then all of a sudden it starts to erupt, right? And it's the same thing with the business landscape. You can never wrestle your laurels. But even though when you reach the summit, there's always a chance of the environment changes, so you have to make those adjustments. So why do you create this game called Biggie Bills? And as you describe it, it's an interactive strategy thinking system for teaching strategy. Why do you create the game?
So, as you said, I've been connected with the concept of strategy for a long time. In fact, my dissertation was on how to understand role of middle managers that they play in executing successful strategies of organizations. And that was in 90s. So I'm an old folk. and so I followed two paths. I've been an academic, but I also have been an entrepreneur. And as an entrepreneur, I started a consulting firm where my focus was training people on understanding challenges of execution of strategy. But also as an educator, I took a path of being focused in executive training or executive education. And at St. Joseph's, where I started teaching first, and George Mason, where I am currently. I'm known as a guy who connects well with executives in training.
Mm-hmm.
But my frustration has always been people don't understand what really strategy is. So it was back of my mind, how can I make it interesting for people to understand the concepts of strategy?
Got it.
And uh, part of my success story in executive education has been very hands-on class experience where I create experiential exercises, etc. And that I've done for many years.
Listen, going back to the extended experience you have and actually coming into developing this game through experiential learning, because we find we're both educators, right? And we're both professionals and in the same field. So was there an example of a company that does strategy well to help form the design of your game?
Managers actually learn better when you play the game rather than just deliver a lecture.
Mm-hmm.
So they hired me as a consultant to prove the efficacy of their game. And I created a statistical model to capture uh, across 3 teachers and 3 scenarios, uh, complicated research design. But the short answer is in every scenario, I proved statistically that a short lecture as a pre-brief or debrief followed by a game was 100 times better than a long, detailed lecture.
No, it makes sense to me because everyone, people we take in information all the time. But there's a curve, a learning curve when it comes into learning. Of course, you take it in. There's 3 different levels after learning. What happens, in terms of attaching performance to the learning? Is there a change of behavior as a result of the learning? Right. And apparently your game helps to change the behavior, which is required, which you can't attain by just taking in more information because we probably overload with executive information, but not behavioral changes. And we need behavioral change in the C-suite.
Karen, you bring up a very interesting point. So my aim for the development of game was not providing new information, but ability for managers to apply what they already know in a context of strategic decision making.
That
So
makes
thank you
sense.
for highlighting that.
Good. Within the context of strategy and decision making. It's what you already know, but within a different context. And that's what obviously has been the pain point for a lot of organizations. So how has the game been helpful so far for those who have been playing it in organizations?
Uh, so in the beginning, I would say the game is designed either for senior managers as a one-day retreat where they can spend time in strategy building for next 3 to 5 years, right? So that was one approach. Second approach, my original interest always has been the real execution of strategy in any organization is at middle management level.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of middle managers don't understand the process by which the strategy is created. So either they blindly follow the guidance they receive from their senior managers, or they become disheartened and they actually sabotage the big strategy.
Mm-hmm.
So my second approach was, after playing the game, I will debrief to middle managers on how this game makes you realize strategy execution can become easier. So originally I had 2 purposes of the game. One was either to build new strategy as a retreat, or execution of strategy over time if the strategy was already built. And both of them worked very well. I'm restricted to use some of the names of my clients. So, but I'll tell you, a subsidiary of a German firm that hired me over 1 year on implementing their innovation management strategy, their middle managers were extremely excited after playing the game. They realized that they had never appreciated that within given resources, how do you execute your strategy? Their standard complaint was, I want to do this, but I can't do this because it's not here. It's not available. My big bosses just don't know. And all of a sudden, after playing the game, they all came up to me and said, can we every quarter meet again, play the game, second time, third time, and revisit the challenges we face in execution? So that's one
Mhm,
example. Going back to, but all of this was working great until March 2020.
mhm.
Because remember, this was a board game. People sat
Yeah,
face to face in tables in the same classroom, and they saw each other's moves, and that's why it was extremely dynamic. And everything came to a stop. I lost all my contacts because nobody was meeting face to face.
right.
So, appropriately for your podcast, now my game was at a risk of whether would I even survive, and it had become a very good tool for my strategy consulting. So, actually, the question was, uh, do I have a potential of business continuity without this game in strategy consulting field? So to overcome that challenge, I had two options. I can hope and pray that COVID gets over very soon, or alternatively, instead of thinking like a risk averse academic, become a risk evaluating entrepreneur and say, if I'm suffering because of consulting is difficult currently, there will be other consultants who will be also suffering. So if I modify my approach, I may actually open up a new market. So with that kind of thought process, I found somebody who was a game designer.
Mhm.
After spending a lot of time, effort, and money, uh, he has taken my tabletop card game and now converted completely into digital game, and that has been tremendous because I launched my digital game in April, and I have already secured multiple clients and new avenues of markets that I didn't have. And if we have time, I'll elaborate on that.
But no, that's excellent because that's a great lesson, and not just for you, but really for all of us, no matter where we are, whether we're an employee or entrepreneur or academic, it doesn't really matter. This pandemic, even in a post-pandemic environment, we need to ask that question in terms of what if, right? And what does that scenario look like for you, right? If I can't have this game in person, what's the alternative, right? What is the alternative? That's what we call alternative analysis. It's a big fancy word, but that's what we do. And that's something that we all can incorporate in terms of this is a great opportunity to rethink how we do what we do, even when it comes to the creative approaches you had designed with your game. So, and moving on and starting to wrap this up a bit, why is game theory? Now, you use some of the game theory to actually come up with this game. Why is game theory important in strategy development skills?
So more I speak to people, more I present my current patented game to potential clients, what I'm beginning to realize is that human mind at heart, or human mind learns from gamification. We all are playful at some level, depending upon our upbringing, whether it's been encouraged or it's been stunted, but we all are playful people. So anything which has to be done routinely, if playfulness can be introduced in that, it becomes more interesting. So from that perspective, now that I've created the game, and even before that, when I used to do many hands-on experiential exercises, the idea was that I can give all the knowledge about strategy by PowerPoint and standing in front of the audience. And some people appreciate that. And I'm not a bad platform speaker, so it works. But it gets even more exciting when for a while I take away the structure of student, teacher, lecturer, knowledge giver, knowledge seeker, and we all just get involved in playing the game. So
Wow. I love that in terms of removing the structure, because that's what we've done with this remote working, and found out that people can be productive. And so there's an interconnectivity and connection between all of this learning here in terms of game theory and strategy and removing structures and experiential learning, and how that experiential learning actually really took a big boost during COVID, because that's what we've been doing. We've relearning how we do our work, right? And still being productive. Well, Mahesh, listen, I want to thank you for being here today. I want to leave you with any last words that you want to leave us with.
so a wonderful win-win. So from that perspective, I love the idea that somebody will say, I took a risk of putting a lot of money converting the game. In my case, as per your podcast title, I flipped the risk.
You sure did. You sure did flip this risk, and you did it well. Absolutely. And you went from one to one yourself to one to many
Thank you.
by digitizing the experience. So you can digitize experiential learning. You don't have to physically be there
Exactly.
to have a successful experiential learning. I think that's something we can all take away from this conversation we've had with you. So Mahesh, thank you again for being here. And I want to thank everyone for listening and tuning in to Flip This Risk podcast. I'm Dr. Karen Hardy, and I'll catch you next time.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.